learning a block Gemara. We are up to Daf Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph. We're up to the two dots, middle of the page. Rameya said that you can have any material to tie around the lulav, but he brought a proof that the Choshev people Yerushalayim used to use gold bands to bind the hadas and the arava to the lulav, and the Chacham says no raya from there because they still had a proper tying on the bottom, and that was just on the surface, extra additional thing. Tanya, we learned. Amar Rameya said, "Ma'isa b'Yakir Yerushalayim." There's a story with the Choshev people, Yerushalayim, Shayu Oigin Es Lulavim. They used to bind the lulavim b'Gimayni Shalzav. They used to use like strings made out of gold. They said to him, from there is a raya. The minay haya oigin. They actually had a proper tying on the bottom, and what they did there was only an extra layer for beauty. Now we're going to have a number of dinim that the Rabba put out. Some of them Rabba is going to argue. Abaye seems he wasn't around, and some of them he doesn't. Rabba said to them, he said to those people who were raising these hadassim, and he said to them as follows. He said, in the house of the Reish Galusa, Kigadlitu Haishina. He said that when you go ahead and you're going to tie up the Hamshana, which tie lulav is called the Haishina. So the Hadas and the Harava and the Lulav, the Reish Galusa, Shaid Beisiat. Make sure you leave an area empty that you can put your hand on it, and there should be nothing between your hand and the Lulav. We don't want a chatzitza between your hand and the Lulav itself. So therefore, make sure that you don't have that tie around on the bottom part of the lulav where you place your hand. Says Rava, no, it's not an issue at all. Because that is there for hidur mitzvah. It's there to make the whole mitzvah more nicer. Therefore, it is bottled to the lulav and the hadas and the shine, and therefore it's not considered a hefsek whatsoever. It's not a hefsek at all. Number two, that a person should not have a handkerchief around the lulav when he takes the lulav. We need that you should be holding directly onto the lulav completely, and you don't have that because you're holding onto a handkerchief. And the Rava says, no, it depends. Rava says that if this is what's helping you hold onto the lulav, it's considered a lekicha. So even if it's outside of your hand, if what you're holding on the lulav adds to the beauty of the lulav, then and since your energy that's dragging, that's picking it up, and everything else, it's considered lekicha. Unless it's inside a keli and you're holding the keli, then it's as if you're not holding onto the lulav. But if it's more like an extension of the lulav, it's all right. And how do I know that? So he says, how do I know that? He says as follows. He says, Omar Rava says, Rava, I'll bring a raya. No, I mean, how do I know the lekicha? I don't know if he takes up through something else called the lekicha. We're on the bottom of Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph. So we're talking about if you're taking the lulav but not holding directly, but you add something to the lulav to make it easy for you to lift the lulav and so on. So we're saying if it's sort of an extension of the lulav, it's considered lekicha de davar acher. Rava says it's good enough. Since it's all because of you, it's good enough. How do I know that you make an extension, you're not holding directly, it's good enough? It's not. We learned when it comes to paraduma, when it comes to the hissab, kotza, you're supposed to take the hissab and dip it in to where the water is, the mechatas, and then go ahead and sprinkle it. What happens is too short, and you can't get it into this tube to the bottom where the water is. So what do you do then? So he says here, so if it's too short, for example, is mesapkoi bechud ubekush. What you do is you take this hyssop and you extend it by adding a string to it, or a piece of some other kind of another stick to hold on to it, and then the table you dip it in to the water umayla, and then you take it out. But the oich is be'ezav amazav. When you sprinkle it, you actually have to hold not on the string or on the stick, but you actually hold on to the ezav itself. Now the you're telling me it's good enough to extend it by the string, but it says clearly part of the duty is of the coin is v'tova, that you have to dip it directly, and you're not dipping directly. You're not holding onto the azav. You're holding onto a string that's holding onto the azav. You must say since the through the string you're able to move about the hyssop to get to the water. That's called lekicha de lavacha. It's good lekicha. Says what did I dilma shiny hosam kivan the chavre, because your mamish tied it together, then kigufidam, it's actually part. So it became part of the hyssop, therefore it's good enough. But how do you know where it's not tied together, that it becomes one goof? How do you know that it's good enough? So therefore the question goes back, how do you know that holding the lulav, like in the case we're talking about, that you put your handkerchief or something around the lulav. It's not, doesn't become part of the lulav, just around it. How do you know that's called the kich? I know it's good enough. Elo, you say you're right. I'll bring another ayah, also to do with me'efet paradim. It says mahocha for the following case. It says what happens if dofam mishfeifedes l'shoike? You're supposed to put, let's say, the ashes into the water. Let's say it fell from the tube that you had into the keli, in the trough, whatever it is that's holding all the water, is possible. It's possible. Why? Because it happened, it fell on its own. You're supposed to have kavan and everything else. And because the way you wanted is you brought the ashes in this tube, and then you would go ahead and drop the ashes into this thing made out of stone, this trough made out of stone where the water was sitting. And because everything we used, remember we learned before in the beginning of this Pedic, that everything we used was made out of stone, so it shouldn't be makabel tuma. And they would put the ashes from this tube into the water that was in this trough. And because first goes the water, and then you put in the ashes. What happens? It fell. In other words, you had no kavanah. It's possible because it has to be done with kavanah, with intention. But let's say if you did it with kavanah, it's all right. Now, but if you deliberately drop the ashes into it, it's kosher. But you're not holding onto the ashes. You're holding a shofetis, this tube, and this tube has the ashes in it, and you're dropping it. How can it be kosher? Amai, it's in the pasuk, and it said that you have to take the ashes and you have to place it on the water, even though the pasuk says you place the water on it. We later looked at another place how that works. The Torah says, since you took the shofar deliberately and you had the ashes in there and you deliberately dropped some of the ashes in the water, it's good enough. So we see that even though you're holding another item, but if this enables you to be able to do whatever you have to do, it's considered an extension, is good enough. That's din number 2. Some more dinim. You shouldn't take the lulav and squish it down. Let's say if you have the shine and the hadas already tied, and you push the lulav, from the top down. What happens is if you do that, some leaves are going to fall off from the hadas, some leaves are going to fall off from the rubber, and they'll be detached. And when you put your hand around the lulav, you're going to have some leaves which are detached, and it's a chatzitza. Maybe some leaves will fall off. It's a chatzitza. And Rava says, because these are leaves of the hadas, and these are leaves of the rubber, it's all part of the same mean, it's not a chatzitza. And Lavush already explains this, brought down. So even though you might have, let's say, the leaf of a hadas between your hand and the lulav, it's all still considered like one min, because all one mitzvah, and therefore none of them are considered an impediment or the interception. Amar Rabba says, Rabba, he says another thing, that you should not cut the bottom of the lulav. Let's say you tied the whole thing together, and then now you're going ahead and cut part of the bottom off. Why? Because what will happen is some of the leaves of the lulav, now they lost the part of the stem that they were attached to. So these leaves now are separated, and they are now not considered kosher for the lulav. But it's still hanging in there because it was tied. And these leaves are considered chatzitza. The Rava says the same thing again. The Achrein tried to figure out why do you have to break these up in 2 halachas when the principle is the same. That way, most Mefarshim learn that Rabba holds min b'mina is chaytzitz, and Rava holds that min b'mina is not chaytzitz. In fact, that's the very central theme of their argument. Some other dinim, nothing to do with chatzitza, but generally speaking, hadas shel mitzvah when it comes to the hadas in Yelulav, also lahareach boy. You're not allowed to smell it on Yom Tov before the beautiful smell, because we learn out in Avtes and Sukah Chag, the Sukkah Tasa, we learn out that's like a karma chagiga. The Sukkah itself becomes kaddish, becomes holy, and that's why you don't have any hana from your Sukkah during the mitzvah, while Kozman you have a mitzvah. So the same thing applies to Hadas. Kozman Sukkah, the Hadas becomes sanctified. And what is the primary purpose of a Hadas? Is for its fragrance. So therefore, you're not allowed to smell the Hadas during Sukkot. Also, you're not allowed to smell it. But esig shel mitzvah, when it comes to an esig mitzvah, mutar laharech, you're allowed to smell an esig. Now the question is, why should you? What's the difference? If it's kaddish and therefore it's muktzah, you shouldn't be able to smell an esig either. So the Gemara says no. The primary purpose of an esig is not its fragrance, but rather it's food, it's flesh, and therefore it's muktzah from its primary purpose. By hadas, the main function of a hadas is it's to generate beautiful fragrance, and therefore when it became muktzah, what's forbidden? To smell it. But when it comes to the esig, what's the main purpose of the esig? Is the flesh. Forget the mitzvah now, but generally, what's the idea of the esig? Is the flesh, to eat it. Therefore, when it became muktzah, you shouldn't eat it. But the fragrance is all right. My time of Hodas Larecha is mainly for her re'aki when you became muktzah merecha aktzeh. What became aser? The smell. But esig la'achilakoi, but esig which is for eating. Ki aktzeh machila aktzeh. When they say made muktzah, they made a muktzah from eating. Rabba says Rabba Hodas b'mechuber. Now we're talking about Shabbos. The rest of the year, forget about Sukkot. Hodas, while it's growing, mutter lahariach boy, you're allowed to smell it because we're not worried you're going to pluck it, you're going to, and cut it off on Shabbos. But esig b'mechuber, asr l'rich boy. An interesting reasoning why. An esig, we don't want you to go smell while it's still attached to the tree. We're scared you're going to pick it. Now, what's the difference? Explain as follows. My time. Hadas, the main purpose of a hadas is, as we said before, is for its fragrance. If we allow you, let's say, even if we allow you to go ahead and smell while it's growing, we're not worried you're going to cut it off. Why? Because what purpose? You can smell it just as well while it's growing than when you cut it off. And therefore, we're not worried you're going to forget, and on Shabbos you're going to pull it off. In order to do what you're doing right now, the main purpose of a hadas is for the smell. You can smell all this while it's growing just when you cut it off. So you're not you're going to cut it off. The problem with an esig is the main purpose of an esig is eating. So even though you're going to smell it, for what its main purpose is eating, the only way you can really eat it is when you pull it off the tree. So therefore, you're going to forget yourself and actually pick it on Shabbos. Esig the main function of an esig is to be eaten. So even though you're not going, you have no intention of eating right now, your only intention is smelling it. Eat shadi slave, you're going to allow him. You're going to go and cut it off. Well, my Rabba says Rabba. So therefore, it's forbidden. Esig is forbidden. What do you call it? Rabba says lulav b'yamin, a lulav should be in your right hand, but esig and smile, esig should be in your left hand. My timer, why should the lulav be more chashuv than the esig when you would think the first item in the pasuk is creates hadar? Shouldn't that be in your right hand? Hani tlas and mitzvahs, v'hai chadar mitzvahs. The lulav is made up of 3 mitzvahs. The lulav, the hadas, and the rava, while the esig is made up only of 1 mitzvah. And therefore, you make the bracha on the lulav, which is all 3.
Why don't we count them as 1 mitzvah, the combination? If you take any one by itself, you're not yotze anything. You haven't fulfilled any mitzvah. It's only when they're in combination that they are mitzvah. So why don't we count it as 1 mitzvah?
Because the fact is the Torah counts them as 4 independent things. So 3, could we learn the halach is if you can do zeh chazeh, you can do a lulav in the morning, hadas an hour later, another hour later. So it's clear that 3 mitzvahs. It's not like Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to tie them together. That's the mitzvah. We hold we're only tying them together to make it easier. We don't have to be tied. There's 3 separate mitzvahs altogether. It's 4 mitzvahs we have here.
But Lepoil, if I let's say I don't have an esrog, but I have all the other 3, can I make a bracha? Am I being
not at all? Not at all. So
they are dependent.
There are 4 mitzvahs that are dependent on each other in order to be able to. Could we learn the word lekachtem, lekicha tama? The only time you yotze is if you did all 4. If you did 3, you didn't do 3/4 of the mitzvah. You did nothing.
You did 0.
That's right. But the machlek is a shaynim if you swap hands. Let's say you put a lulav in your left hand, but the yotze or not yotze. The halach and halach is you yotze, but we actually say then put it the right way and say it again without a bracha. If you're a righty and a lefty, machlek is there as well what you should do. But we paskin that if you're a lefty, you use your left hand, which is everybody else's right hand. Your left hand, which is your right hand. Rabbi Yemos asked, why did the bracha only on Tzlul? Why don't you make on Tzlul Esrig or Tzlul Dalad Minim? So he says here, Hoyel v'Gevoyim Bekol. He said, why? Because it's the tallest. It's standing out. Because now you have 4 independent mitzvahs. You can't tell me you're making a bracha. Make a bracha on each one. Or make a bracha on Tilas Dalad Minim or something. Why on the lulav? So he says, because it's the tallest of them all. So we took it literally, meaning that it's the tallest. Well, it's the highest, right? The lulav is a tefach higher than the Hodas Narava. Says that's fine. As far as the Hodas Narava is concerned. But maybe take the esig. Maybe the din should be that the esig, which is in your left hand, lift it higher than the lulav. And make a bracha on that. Lift the esig and make a bracha on the esig. So we thought that you meant literally the lulav is taller than everything else. As the Gemara Amalei Hoyel the Minay, the tree that the lulav grows on is Gavoya Mekul, is higher than all the other ones. So therefore you make a bracha. Interesting. That because the tree that it grows on is taller, higher than all the other ones, is a reflection on the cheshivas of the lulav itself. And therefore you make a bracha on the lulav. Here you can't answer because it's 3 mitzvahs. So they make a bracha on the Hadas, make a bracha on the Arava, or make a bracha on the Tilas Dalaminim. Doesn't explain why you make the bracha and you only mention the lulav. He's saying it is a chshivas to the lulav because the tree that it grows on is the tallest tree. Says the Gemara Mishnah, part of the mitzvah of lulav is to do ninuyim, is to shake the lulav as well. The Heichen Hayemenani, and the Gemara already asked, who said you have to shake it? Because the Gemara will answer, because the previous Mishnah it says the lulav has to be 1 tefach tola, and the Hodas Narava Kidei L'danei, in order to shake it. So the raya shaking it is important. The Heichen Taste already has a discussion whether we shake it also when we take the lulav, with the bracha in the morning, when you make a bracha on the lulav. Do you also do all the nenuim like we do in Halal? Taste says it seems you do. He brings a couple of rayas from the Gemara. When a child is old enough and he knows how to take a lulav and shake it, that's when the child has to start making a bracha on lulav. So we do the nenuim as well when we do the lulav before Halal, and in fact. So we do the bracha like Arizal says. You should make the bracha first thing in the morning. Others make the bracha on lulav in shul right before they make it on halal. And by us it says if we do that, we make the bracha right before halal, then we actually do less than nuyim in halal because you've already made some of the nuyim right then and there. But if you made in the morning before davening, then you still do all the nuyim in halal. So what's in the nuyim in halal? Now they should know there's a very big convoluted machlekes and where you do the nuyim or how you do the nuyim. So if you ever go to any shul and you see people doing different things, everything has a basis. I'll just cover some of them when we go through it. The heichnaim and how do you shake the lulav? So you do it b'hoydol Hashem tchila b'seif. If you look in Tehillim, and the last pedic for Halal starts with hoydol Hashem kitoy klam chazdei, and then it goes through min hametzar. And then it goes Baruch Haba, and the very end of Baruch Haba, Hoydul Hashem, and that's all one pedic. So when the Mishnah says here, Hoydul Hashem in the beginning, and Hoydul Hashem at the end, it means the end, beginning of that one pedic, right? So the beginning of Hoydul Hashem, Yemen Yisrael, and all that, and then the end Hoydul Hashem. You shake it again, and over on Hashem Hoshiyana, and also on Hashem Hoshiyana. Dear Basil, Tases wonders, and everybody calls it Tases. Why on Hashem Hoshiyana? It's right in the middle of a pedic. One second, Bishama says you also shake, you also wave it when it comes to Hatzlichuna. Says the Gemara Mishnah Amr Bekiva Tzeifa Hayisi Berabba Gamliel Rabbi Shua was watching and observing Rabbi Gamliel Rabbi Shua. Shekol Ha'am Hayimenanin Eslovein. Everybody was shaking the lulav. The Haim Loinenu, they didn't shake it. Ella Ba'ana Hashem Hashina. Machlek is how to understand pshat in what Rabbi Kiva is saying. Is they saying that they shook it by On Hashem Hashina and not On Hashem Hatzlichana? In other words, they agreed with Hill, not Shammai. Or they're saying they didn't even do it in Hoydul Hashem. The only place where they shook it is only On Hashem Hashina. Teisha says, where does On Hashem Hashina come? Teisha brings a pasuk from Divrei Hayamim, and it says that Oz Yiranu Atzeh Hayar, the trees will start singing. Belifna Hashem. And then and he says, what do you mean the trees will sing in? Because we're going to wave the tree. In other words, we're going to be singing with the trees. We wave the branches, which is on Sukkot. And the pasuk afterwards says, Hoydul Hashem ki tov ki lo'elam chazdei. And the pasuk after that it says, V'imro ha'she'enu l'kei yishen. So therefore, we know that when do we make the we were singing with our trees when we say Hoydel Hashem, when we say On Hashem. How exactly does it work by Hoydel Hashem? So you know there are many different minhagim. So we just do once. We do once. So this is Chabad. We do once the On Hashem Mashiach in the beginning, and then Hoydel Hashem. We do once Hoydel Hashem, just once. We don't do it all the other times when we say Yoimana. Then we do twice on Hashem Mashina, then we do once by Baruch. What do you call it? At the end by Hoydel Hashem as well. At the end, others do it. Here, the others are the big machlekes, the Bas Yosef and the Ramah itself with Mar Avram, and basically that every time you say Hoydel Hashem Kitayv, you wave it. It's the tzibur. So therefore, when we do Hoydel Hashem and Noima Yemen Israel, Yemen and all that, every single time you respond Hoydel Hashem, you wave it. But what about the chazan? So here you have some who say the chazan only does it the first time and not the rest. He doesn't. Then the Ramah says he does it the first 2 times because when he says to the people Yoima no Yisro, he's telling them to do it. So let's do it together. So he does it only the first 2 hoydus, but not the 3rd and 4th. Others say he does it. In fact, very few say that the chazan should actually do it all 4. It's either the first 1 or the first 2. And meaning Ashkenaz is you do all the haydus, so therefore the last haydu, when you say twice, double haydu, they also shake it twice by the haydu, not like in Baba you only do it once. Okay, then we continue.
What if you're davening at home, like we often do lately? Does it make a difference?
Also, you do all the Nanuim. But again, it depends which meaning you do, Ashkenaz or Chabad. Mm-hmm. You do all the Nanuim. Also, the direction that you're facing, whether you should always face Mizrach, which is what many poskim hold. You have to always face Mizrach, and then you start, you're doing it in the different directions of the compass. And again, there's different minhagim if you just go to the points of the compass, or minhag Lubavitch, you do first right, then left, forward, above, below, and then behind. But again, so many hold you have to be facing, no matter which way you're davening, but when it comes to the Nuim, you have to be facing Mizrach, which is the way it was done there. Others don't say it doesn't necessarily have to be so.
Isn't that because, as we're about to learn, that the whole manuim, it's la'atzer ruach ra, it's to prevent different bad winds and so on. So it's got very much to do with physical direction.
Oh yeah, you'll see in a minute. Yeah, see in a minute. Others say when it says here that Hoydel Hashem Tchila v'Soif, it doesn't mean anything what I just told you right now. It actually, others say what it means is the beginning of the pasuk and the end of the pasuk. Tchila v'Soif means, in other words, every word. Because there are 6 points, there are 6 directions that we wave it at, and Hoydel Hashem has 6 words besides the word Hashem. So therefore, that's what he's saying. It. Don't just shake at the beginning of the pasuk and finish, or the end of the pasuk. Do it at the beginning and the end. So therefore, we broke it up. Every word you wave it in a different direction. And by Ana Hashem Ashina, every word you wave it in 2 directions. So first thing I said, Linua Malik Hashmei. Where does anything about waving? Think about a Hasam Kais. Continuation of the previous Mishnah. By kosher, any look has Yitzvachim plus an extra tefach in order to shake, wave it as kosher. Ukamar, Heichen Menadi. And we say, where do you actually wave it? Our Mishnah says, okay, you mentioned waving. So where exactly do you do the waving? Says the Gemara, Tanhaus we learned over there. We have a number of other occasions, like a Karma Shlamim, we always say you have to wave it. Questionable whether there also you have, Tesa says, whether you have to follow these directions we say over here or not. But we learn it from Shavuos. Shavuos and Sukkot have a lot in common. Shavuos is the time when we're davening for the fruit, Peiros Se'ilim, and Sukkot is when we're davening for the rain. And you need the 2 to work together in hand. So therefore, whatever we do, waving in Shavuos must be similar on Sukkot. So we learned over there, you had to bring 2 sheep for Shavuos, and you also brought 2 lambs, and you also brought 2 loaves of bread, and you had to put them on each other. Even though the pasuk seems to say you put the animals on the bread, we learn now that it's the bread on the animals. Big machlek is Rashi and Rambam. According to Rashi right here, the animal is alive when you lift it and wave it, and according to the Rambam, it's only after you shecht. But you said is cake to the voice. What do you do? And you place the 2 loaves of bread on top of the lambs. And you place it underneath it. What do you call it? Maybe. What's waving mean? Forward and back. And what also? And up and down. So you go up and down and forward and back. That's what it says. Asher hunaf. Waving means horizontal, and asher huram is vertical. Now, there is a machlekes if we actually do it in all four directions, or you only do it in two directions. The machlekes are showing him. We follow, and you bring in four directions. So it goes as follows. Now, why the fascinating Russia? The Rush says, why were there those against to do it in four directions? What's wrong? Why? Look, I'll come back in a minute. The fascinating Rush. Says the Gemara, maybe you bring it back and forth because you're showing all the four directions that the Abish is in control over. And Mailu made it up and down, Lemisha Shemayim, acknowledging the Abishter. That's up and down. The reason why we wave in four directions is because of four, like the word Echad by Klishma, Dalad, you think about the four corners of the world. So the Abishter controls the four corners. And then up and down because the Abishter is above and he's controlling down here below. Okay, that's one reason. The other reason, like you just said, in the West, in Israel, they learned the following. Maybe. Why did they wave it horizontally? To restrain, to contain the horrible winds, the hurricane winds, and the fierce winds. And Milo Moided, why did they go up and down? To hold back, to lolim roim, do which is very damaging. I'm not going to show what kind of do that is. That was very damaging. We'll have a little bit more tightness, and therefore that's what it's hold up. So we go up and down. The Rush says, you know why there were poskim that says you shouldn't go in four directions. Because if you look if you go in four directions, you're actually creating a cross. And that's like Avodah Zarah. And that's why they didn't want to do it in four directions. They did only one direction. There's the Rush. My problem with that is that the real cross is if you go up and down and one direction. That's a cross. Because you have a vertical line and then you have a horizontal going across. He said, Faket, you must do a vertical and a four directions across, so therefore you're not creating a tzelem. It's an amazing thing. Because he's talking about, you're just moving your finger up and down in the air, you're moving something in space without, making, and that's already a sign of a cross. Even though, by the way, the Ramah writes today, that today cross is not really a religious item and so on. But
the Christian does this gesture with their hands. They move it up and down, they make a form of a tzelem.
Yeah, but that's and they whatever. Yes, you're right. So that's what the Rosh was saying. I guess they lived in very strong Christian countries in those days, and therefore they felt it was abhorrent to do that.
Rabbi Yochanan lived in Eretz Yisrael, and then they have a member from other Amoraim of Eretz Yisrael. What's the thing Amru v'Marava?
What do you mean?
You got Amar Rabbi Yochanan, maybe, and then they say v'Marava Masne Hoche.
Yeah, but the Gemara is writing it. The Gemara written above. The Gemara saying, and I saw another thing they said.
But it's interesting that at the time of these Tanoim, this Maisa with Yoshko, it would have been fresh news.
This is Amoraim. No, Rabbi Amoraim. This is the number.
I'm saying, how much would Christianity have already spread at this stage?
You're talking 350 years after it started. It's strong. Very strong, very prevalent.
Yeah, but the question is whether it got to, how much of it got to Babel?
I don't know, but they're talking about Eretz Yisrael. Remember, they're talking about Eretz Yisrael. I don't know. But by the time the Rush wrote it, the Rush is writing it. And he's talking about his times. Maybe in the Gemara, there's no argument what the Gemara meant. The question is today, when the Rush's time, what they should do. Should they do it in four directions? Or two? The Gemara doesn't spell out how many directions to do it in. The Gemara just says, maybe. Sound like back and forth.
The Rush talking about his times, or the Rush is commenting on the Gemara's time?
No, he's not. Machlek is asking what they should do.
Okay. No,
and even in Gemara's times, it was very well entrenched already by then. Says the Gemara, what do we see from here? We learn an interesting thing. We learn now. Shirei mitzvah, the leftover mitzvah is ma'akvan as aparanis. Even the remnants of the mitzvah, because nanuyim is not ma'akiv, it's not the mitzvah of lulav. Mitzvah of lulav is lekachton lechem, pick it up, you eat already. In fact, according to some, as soon as you put your hand on it, you already eat. Famous machlek is Rashash of Kiv Eger. We'll talk about it another time. So Shiri mitzvah is ma'akvan aparanis, yet it holds back the terrible winds, the hurricane winds. Shali trufa Shiri mitzvah, waving it is only the leftover. It's not pivotal to the mitzvah. And it's talking about kabbanas. It's the kapara, whether you do trufa or you don't do trufa. And so therefore, this is only like a shiri mitzvah, the addition to the mitzvah. And yet, it said ruchas v'talim it holds all this back. So this is side by Shavuos and side by Sukkot, because they're both there for the same reason, to make sure that the fruits grow well. The same thing applies to lulav. Rabbi Yaakov used to have a habit. He would take it, bring it out forward, and then bring it back. And he would say, he would like to taunt the Yetzer Hara, and he would say, "Dain Geda be'ein the sit. Let this be like an arrow and poke out the eyes of the son." And the Gemara says, "La milsi, don't antagonize the son. You're trying, you're going to aggravate him, and who knows what he's going to come back with. Leave him out. Leave him out." A big machlek is exactly when you, according to some, melech means you just do once back and forth in each direction. According to others, you do 3 times in each direction. And according to some, just going back and forth, that's already called an anua. According to others, you have to shake it. According to some, you shake it when you go to each end, and then you have to bring it back to your heart. You have to touch your chest. And according to others, while you're traveling back and forth, you're shaking it as well. So that's the shaking. And so there are many, many different minhagim and how to do all of these things. Now, there's an interesting machlekes, fascinating machlekes. You have to look this up in the Ramah, just see, because very seldom the Ramah brings down all of his teachers. And then he argues with all of them. The question is, when you do the Nenuyim, so you go forward, backward, up and down, when you go down, the Ramah brings 2 opinions how you should go down. One opinion is, first opinion, you should actually turn the lulav upside down. Hold it, the lulav, hold with your hand, the lulav, the hodas, and the arava, facing downwards, because lamata, you have to, this is one of the things in my lamata. Mata means turn it facing down. So you have to have the lulav facing down. And it's gederek dilasa, because you're holding it from the top, and therefore it's gederek dilasa. That's what the Ramah says, the first opinion. Then he says, I've heard, then he says, there's another opinion, you should hold it upright. Just, you just bring it down low. And he says, that's what the Beis Yosef says the name of his father. It's very seldom the Beis Yosef quotes his father. That's, I think, only one other place. And that's where he quotes his father, how it should be done. Then the Ramah says, I heard this from Rav Shalom Shachna, my teacher, also happened to be his father-in-law, and who told me this in the name of his teacher, Rabbi Yaakov Polak, the famous Rabbi Yaakov Polak, who teaches everybody. But then the Ramah concludes, but I think they're all wrong. And the halach is when you do the name, you should turn the lulav upside down. That's what the Ramah says. I'm looking in the city of the Alter Rebbe. I'll quote you what Alter Rebbe says here, fascinating Alter Rebbe. Right before Halal, Alter Rebbe lists all the dinim. And when it comes to the Nuim, he says here, he says, and the 5th one is Lamata, right? You take the lulav and essing and you bring it down. He says in parentheses, V'loi sheyahapik, don't turn it over upside down like the Ramah Paskins. Chas v'shalom. You hear what Alter Rebbe adds? Regarding the opinion of the Ramah, the Alter Rebbe says, "V'loi sheyahapik chas v'shalom reish halulav lamata." God forbid to follow that opinion. What strong language.
Does the Magen Avraham comment on the Ramah at all?
Does the Ramah? Yeah, everyone says the halach is. Does the Ramah?
Magen Avraham.
I have in front of me here a Mishnah Berurah. I'll tell you in a second. Give me 1 second. Where are we? Now, unfortunately, we don't have it cut out right in the middle of the simon. But here it says here, where is it? I'm going to find it there. Oh, here it is. It says that V'yesh, this is the Ramah. V'yesh medaktikin, the second opinion is Shaloi lahapich halulav kishemenani lamata. Those are medaktik. He calls them medaktikin. They don't want to turn it over. That's the Mariel, the Beis Yosef, his father. I heard this from my teacher, Rav Shachna, who saw this from his teacher, Rav Yaakov Polak. That's what Arizal writes. And then the Ramah concludes, I still like better the first minig, which is what? You turn it upside down. And that is to me the ikr. The Magen Avraham don't think says anything. And the Taz says it is better to follow the second opinion. This way, everyone holds you yaitza. According to if you turn it upside down, according to the second opinion, you want yaitza. If you hold it upright, even those who say you turn it down, say, but yeah, but reluctantly you are yaitza. There's no Magen Avraham here. And the Alter Rebbe says, following the first opinion, use the word chas v'shalom.
But Lapoil, have you ever seen anyone turn the whole arba minim, the whole lulav upside down? I've never seen it.
I'm sure there are. The Ramah says this is how you should do it. I'm sure that people will follow the Ramah.
I think what you see is they kind of turn it horizontal and lower it a little bit.
And that's not what the Ramah says. Yeah. And the Taz doesn't say, that the Ramah is wrong. It just says it's better. These are the words. It's Yosef Toiv. And the Alter Rebbe says Chas v'Shalom.
Interesting.
Wow. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow night. I think tomorrow night will be the last night.